in Afghanistan. The name Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif said in reaction to the news of these terror attacks in the United States, and I am quoting, "We want to tell the American children that Afghanistan feels your pain, and we hope that the courts find justice." Now, this statement, again, made by a Taliban ambassador to Pakistan, his name, Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif, he made it at a news conference in Islamabad. And I would just add that we're told that at the top of the hour, which would be perhaps 1 o'clock Eastern time, we're expecting a news conference live from Kabul, Afghanistan. That is the capital of Afghanistan, the Taliban being the controlling religious party in that country, Afghanistan being the country where we have every reason to believe Osama bin Laden, the leader of a huge terrorist network, continues to live in hiding. The Taliban has denied his presence there from time to time, but it is believed by those who follow the activities of his organization that he is in Afghanistan. So we will, of course, be watching that. Let me just... All right, Aaron, I want to go back to you now in New York.
Thank you, Judy. We have on the phone with us New York's Mayor, Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, give us your best piece of information as the situation right now.
The situation right now is a massive rescue effort that's going on right now. We're trying to evacuate thousands and thousands of people. We have as many of our police and fire personnel as we have down in the southern part of Manhattan, evacuating people, trying to save as many lives as possible. We've been in communication with Governor Pataki, who's gotten the National Guard ready, and they're going to come in and relieve us a little bit later in the day. And we've spoken to the White House, and the urban search and rescue teams will come here also to assist us. But right now, it's the New York City Police and Fire, EMS, that are down there trying to evacuate as many people as we possibly can. And we've asked everyone to leave Lower Manhattan if they can on their own so that it relieves our efforts. And this will be going on all day. It's a horrible, horrible tragedy.
It is that. Mr. Mayor, can you tell me, is it a... Are people panicking down there, or
no,
are they
people.
leaving?
I was, I was there right in a building that got hit by the debris when the first tower collapsed. So I had to evacuate with people, and we were trapped in the building for a while. And we finally were able to get out, and we all walked north. And people, everything that I observed, even though it was hundreds, maybe in some cases thousands of people that were walking down the street, they were orderly, they were calm, they handled themselves really and probably better than anybody had any right to expect.
And Mr. Mayor, we were told one of the problems, and Lord knows there are hundreds of problems, one of the problems was that a large number of police, fire, EMS personnel have also been injured in this. Can you shed any light on that?
I don't even want to contemplate what the number will be. But when the building collapsed, we had a lot of our police officers and firefighters in the building. And I know many of them because I saw some of them go in because I was there, and I'm praying for them. I just hope they're able to get out.
I think we all are.
The losses to our police department and fire department,
Sir,
are going to be severe.
Do you believe that was there another set of explosions that caused the buildings to collapse, or was it the structural damage caused by the planes?
I don't know. I saw the first collapse and heard the second because I was in a building when the second took place. I think it was structural, but I cannot be sure.
And can you tell us how many hospitals in the city and perhaps outside the city too? All of them.
Right now, at last count, we were utilizing over 50. I think it'll be over 100 and that was as of a half hour ago.
And
we're utilizing all of the hospitals in New York City. We're utilizing the hospitals in Westchester and Rockland, Nassau County, northern New Jersey. And the main thing we have to urge people to do is to be calm and evacuate Lower Manhattan. And as far as the rest of the city is concerned, just to go about their lives as best as possible. I never thought I would see something like this happen. I got there after the first plane hit and before the second, and watching people jump from the top of the World Trade Center is an unbelievable sight.
Mr. Mayor, my colleague Jeff Greenfield is with us also. Jeff?
Mr. Mayor, in terms of, you've already said that you want Lower Manhattan evacuated, you want everybody else to go about their business. Are there specific instructions that you want to communicate right now to police, fire, everybody else?
Well, police and fire are there, and they're there in large numbers, and they are, first of all, trying to get into the rubble and the debris to save as many people as possible. We also have thousands of police officers in Lower Manhattan, and what we want people to do is to leave Lower Manhattan if they can on their own. Just to walk.
Sorry.
I just talked to Dick Grasso, who runs the stock exchange, and we have a lot of police there. They have 3,000 people there. We're going to walk them out. We're walking them east and then north, which is essentially the way I walked out. I was right below the World Trade Center when it collapsed, and then we walked up to Greenwich Village. People should walk out of Lower Manhattan, get above Canal Street, for safety reasons, but for a second reason. We need people out of there so we can get thousands of ambulances in and out over the course of the next couple hours. And the fewer people we have there, the more lives we're going to be able to save.
Mr. Mayor, are the subways operating?
The subways are operating outside of Manhattan.
Outside of Manhattan?
Outside of Manhattan, the subways are operating. A couple of delays here and there, but in all the other 4 boroughs, the subways are operating. In Manhattan, there are significant delays. We thought we had the Lexington Avenue open, but it is not. I'm just checking right now. The Lexington Avenue is not open. The A train is working, and people will just have to test and see. The best thing to do right now is to walk. The safest and best thing to do is to walk to your destination. Where schools have remained open, and we've worked with the chancellor to try to make certain that the schools will remain open for as long as they have to help parents with the kids that would be coming home, starting at around 1 or 2 o'clock.
Mr. Mayor, as you know better than anyone, and certainly New Yorkers know, but people around the country perhaps do not, this was Election Day here. What is the status of the election?
We canceled it. The governor and I decided about an hour and a half ago that it made no sense to have an election today. We needed all of those police officers who were at the election site, and we need to focus on rescue. So we'll find another day. We'll find another day for the election. The governor and I made that decision about an hour and a half ago.
Mr. Mayor, you're a very focused guy in moments like this. Is it hard, given the magnitude of what's happened here and around the country, to focus on what you have to do and not just be angry?
It's very hard, and it's very hard because I know some of the people that are there. They're personal friends and close friends who are.
In fact, Mr. Mayor,
who are in the building, and I haven't been able to find out if they're safe yet.
Your emergency command center, what some people have called a bunker, was located, was it not, in one of the World Trade Center buildings?
It was located close enough to it so that it was affected by it. It's not in one of the buildings, but it was located right in that area, as is City Hall, the police department, and all of them had to be evacuated. So that area of Manhattan, once I was in a building at the time that we were using as a command center, and we were trapped in the building for a while, for about 20 minutes, not able to get out different exits that were overcome with smoke and debris.
Mr. Mayor, just as a practical question, do hospitals need help? Do they need
hospitals need all of the help they can get. We're getting a great deal of help from the surrounding areas. The governor has mobilized the state in order to make hospitals available to us outside of Manhattan. Any hospital personnel or emergency personnel that want to come in and volunteer, that'd be enormously helpful. But the best thing for us to do right now, we're trying to coordinate, is to move people out of the city to hospitals in surrounding areas, which we're actually doing now. But so far, though, our hospital system is we're very fortunate to have a gigantic hospital system.
Do they have enough blood? Do they need blood? Do they need people to come in and help them out?
I'm sure they will. We're getting the National Guard to relieve our people by early to late this afternoon. They're being mobilized now. And 3 urban search and rescue teams are going to come to New York City to help us. And then anyone that wants to volunteer from surrounding areas, volunteer fire departments and others, we're working with them now to do that, to try to relieve our fire department.
It's a horrific day, Mr. Mayor.
there's no possible way to begin to describe it.
No, there is not.
To see what happened there is, of course, it makes you very, very angry. It's almost impossible to describe the level of anger that you have that somebody or someone would do something like this. And
Sir.
all of the good and wonderful people that were affected by this. There's no reason for this. There's no excuse for this. And there's something like this. It's just something you never thought you would live to see.
I couldn't agree more, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani on what was to be an election day. The mayor not up for re-election because of term limits, but the election has been postponed. Jeff, I just step back for a second.
Well, that's
you talk about anger, and we stand up here and we look at this, and we've all listened to what's been going on now as we've been on the air for 3 hours or so. And there was a woman that Richard Roth interviewed about a half hour ago who said what I suspect most Americans are feeling right now, and some would like to say and can't, how angry she was, how cowardly this all seemed to her. Quickly, we go back to Washington and Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Aaron, government sources telling CNN that President Bush, who had been in Florida for a 2-day trip and who broke that trip off this morning to head back to Washington, will now not return to Washington. Repeating, President Bush will not return to Washington. We do not know where the president will land or where his aircraft will go, Air Force One, but we just are passing along this information just as soon as we have it. Again, as we were talking to former NATO head Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, a little while ago, he pointed out that there are contingency plans that the military and the security people have for the president in a situation like this. So we're not going to do any speculating right here about where the president might be going. Joining us now on the telephone, there is some information we want to share with you about aircraft in the sky that is, we're told, is safe right now. We're told by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they're telling us 50 aircraft are safely in the sky right now, all within about 50 miles of their destination. But in the meantime, we want to talk to Utah Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, who's joining us on the telephones. Senator Hatch, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And I know my colleague Wolf Blitzer, who's here with me in the studio in Washington, had also talked with you. Senator, you've been briefed by what authorities?
Well, I'm on both the Judiciary Committee and also the Intelligence Committee, and I've been briefed by the highest levels of the FBI and of the intelligence community. And I just have to say our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims of this terrible tragedy caused by a bunch of cowards. And there's no justification for what these cowards have done to purely innocent Americans, but I do have some information.
Senator Hatch, this is Wolf Blitzer. Tell us, I spoke with you earlier on the telephone, but tell us precisely what you are now being told in these high-level briefings about those who may, and repeat the word may, have been responsible for these attacks.
You're right. They've come to the conclusion that this looks like the signature of Osama bin Laden and that he may be the one behind this. I think most authorities agree that this is something that we doubt seriously if Iran, Iraq, or Libya would try and do, because they know of the massive response that we'd have to bring down on them. But there was no advance notice at all. They had no way of knowing that this was going to happen. It was carefully planned. And what it means is it seems to me that if that turns out to be true, we're going to have to revitalize Shah Massoud and the other people in Afghanistan who basically are fighting to get rid of this type of terrorism. And I think we're going to have to ask our friends in Pakistan to get, in turn, to be more cooperative than they have in the past. And then we'd have to work with our allies to have an international strategy to combat this type of international jihad against the West.
We're listening to Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. We also have joining us on the telephone Senator John McCain from his home in Arizona. Senator McCain, I assume you've been talking to authorities as well.
Yes, Judy, and I'm on Capitol Hill in Washington.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks
yes,
for clarifying.
Yes. The situation is so serious that words don't describe it. I think that it's clear that the organization and magnitude of the attacks required more than a few people to perpetrate it, and It'll take some time to determine who they are and who supported these attacks, but I think we'll find them out, and they will suffer the full measure of our justice. This is obviously an act of war that's been committed on the United States of America.
What do you mean, obviously, an act of war, Senator McCain?
These attacks clearly constitute an act of war. The unwarranted, unprovoked attacks against innocent American citizens is clearly an act of war, and one that requires that kind of national response and international response.
Senator Orrin Hatch, I believe, is also still with us, Senator. And Senator Hatch, you mentioned the bin Laden organization. Former NATO head General Wesley Clark also said to us about an hour ago in an interview that he believes that it's only the bin Laden organization that is capable of carrying out attacks this coordinated and on this massive a scale. What are you basing your information on?
Well, keep in mind, there are nations that also could carry out these attacks, but I don't think would dare do that, knowing that their signature is going to be figured out. We're going to find out who did this, and we're going after the bastards. It's that simple. And I just have to say that both the FBI and our intelligence community believe that this is a bin Laden signature. And I believe it is. I was the first to point out bin Laden to the Clinton administration and said they're going to kill Americans, and we've got to get on top of that. And I think we're going to have to get on top of it, because this is a cowardly bunch who will stop at nothing to, like you say, have a jihad or a war against the United States, and to do it in the most cowardly fashion.
But Senator McCain, I mean, there will be those who are saying the United States was taking all reasonable precautions. We had security at airports, metal detectors, and so forth and so on. How much more is going to have to be done to prevent something like these things from happening again?
Judy, I don't think our lifestyles will be the same for a long time, since it was before these attacks, as far as use of transportation, particularly airports, are concerned. There have been warnings about whether our security was good enough and whether the proper measures were being taken. I'm sure that'll all be reviewed. By the way, I have no information as to who caused this, and I hesitate to speculate, but I am confident that the President of the United States will lead us, and we will find out who has carried out these acts. And I think it's a little premature to make that determination until we have the hard facts, but I'm sure that we'll get them. The other aspect of this is that it may highlight over time the need for more human intelligence. We have very good technical intelligence capabilities, satellites, etc., but for many years we haven't had the kind of human intelligence which determines motivations before actions are taken.
I'm going to interrupt you, Senator McCain. These are the first pictures we have in. This is from Somerset County, Pennsylvania. This is where the United Airlines flight, I believe it is 176, went down. I'm sorry, I'm correcting. United Airlines 93. This was a Boeing 757 bound from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. It crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, near the town of Shanksville, south of Pittsburgh. We're told about 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. It is not known how many passengers or crew were on board, although initial reports indicated no survivors. Again, these are the first pictures we have coming in from WTAJ there in the Pittsburgh area. United Airlines telling us earlier they had lost this flight, and they knew that it had crashed near Pittsburgh. There is a second United Airlines flight, the Boeing 767, Flight 175, bound from Boston to Los Angeles, has crashed. The airline's still telling us at this point that they do not know where. We don't have information on the number of people aboard. It is possible, but not confirmed, that this would have been the second plane to hit the World Trade Center. Now again, 2 United Airlines flights, and in addition to American Airlines flights, the Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, this was a Boeing 767 with 81 passengers on board, 9 crew members. 2 pilots. This is believed to be one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. All 4 of these planes that we're describing to you now, these flights, all headed to California. The second American Airlines Flight 77, this is a Boeing 757, left Dulles Airport near Washington on its way to Los Angeles. It had 58 passengers on board, 4 crew, 2 pilots. This plane unaccounted for. However, a commercial jet was seen crashing into the Pentagon a few hours ago, and it is believed that this could have been the one, but again, not confirmed. So 2 commercial airliners, American Airlines, 2 United Airlines. And I would just add at this point, because to be reassuring to some extent to those of you who are watching, we've been reporting that all flights within the United States have been canceled. There's been a complete hold down on all commercial travel. However, there were planes that were already in the air when these terrible incidents took place this morning. And as of a few moments ago, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, was reporting that there were still 50 aircraft in the skies. Now, some of those may have landed in the last few minutes, but that was the information as of a few minutes ago. All of them were said to be within 50 or so miles of their destination. Now, I'm getting new information in my ear. Now, reporting our congressional correspondent Kate Snow, you're looking at a picture of the Pentagon live. There's still smoke billowing out of our military command center in the United States. As we look at these pictures, I'm going to turn it over right now to our congressional correspondent Kate Snow, who has with her 2 members of Congress. Kate?
Judy, it's been a bit difficult to get in touch with members of Congress. As we've been reporting, the Capitol has been shut down. You can see it behind me here. You can see that everything's fine there, but it is in a state of lockdown. They've evacuated the Capitol. Joining me here on the roof of a church, I might add, we've managed to get up on the roof here to get a vantage point, is Congressman Curt Weldon, a Republican from Pennsylvania, around the Philadelphia area, not exactly where that video that we just saw, the other end of the state, and also Congressman Ed Schrock from Virginia Beach, from the state of Virginia, also a Republican. You both serve on the Armed Services Committee. In fact, you were in the middle of a briefing. You were about to talk to reporters about the need for more money for our military. Let me start with you, Congressman Weldon. You've been talking to me up here. You've been expressing outrage at all of this. You've been saying this is a failure of the U.S. intelligence system.
It's a failure of our intelligence system. I asked the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Capitol just 45 minutes ago in a meeting with 70 senators and House members, how much advance notice did you have? He said none. There was no intelligence. Our FBI and our CIA are there to intercept raw data. This is a massive operation. And it's a failure that was caused by a lack of resources and by a complacency that set in America over the past 10 years. A complacency that convinced all of us that with the demise of the Soviet Union, there were no more threats. It's a tragedy that it took the loss of thousands of lives to wake this country up and realize that our #1 responsibility is not education, and I'm a teacher, and it's not health care, I'm married to a nurse. It is, in fact, the security and the safety of the American people. And today, our government failed the American people.
Congressman Schrock, how much information have you as a member of Congress been able to get? I know that the members have been milling around here trying to get information. Have you been able to get information?
Not a whole lot. The most information we got was when we went to the U.S. Capitol Police headquarters, and they were piecing together what had happened and trying to feed us as they got that, but nothing substantive. It seems like there's no game plan in operation.
Do the two of you know why you were evacuated from the U.S. Capitol?
Absolutely. I talked to Bill Livingood, the Sergeant-at-Arms in the Capitol, and he said, Kurt, we've been told that a plane is taken off from Reagan, and we think it may be heading toward the Capitol. I mean, they've hit our economic center, the World Trade Center, they hit our Pentagon, they hit our State Department. So the obvious next item you'd like to hit is the U.S. Capitol and perhaps the Supreme Court.
And obviously those are unconfirmed reports that any plane, but there were rumors here for a good 2 hours that there were potentially planes headed this direction.
Now we're in total lockdown, as you said, and members are basically scattered around the city, but we're going to get back to work because we're going to convince these cowards that America doesn't back down, that our government will continue to operate in spite of these terrorist activities.
You said we're at war.
We're at war. We're absolutely at war. This is 21st century war. These are the kinds of activities that we expect from cowards and terrorist groups.
I need to go back to Judy Woodruff now in Washington. Judy?
All right, Kate, thank you. And I want to tell our viewers that we do know now that President Bush has landed near Shreveport, Louisiana, at Barksdale Air Force Base. We're told that he is talking to reporters. There may be a statement from the president, from the White House there on the ground. And one other item here from Washington before I turn it back over to Aaron Brown. In New York, 34 Pentagon victims at least being treated at 3 Washington hospitals. No word on fatalities. Aaron?
Judy, in the area, I guess, of practical information, and we talked to the mayor about this a little bit ago, there is now in New York and in northern New Jersey a critical shortage of blood, a desperate need for blood. We would remind people that giving blood is perfectly safe and on a day like today, absolutely necessary. And so if that's something you can do to help out in the midst of this extraordinary tragedy, you might consider doing that. On the phone with us, James Sanders, who's with Bellevue Hospital, one of the major hospitals here in New York. Mr. Sanders, what can you tell us about the situation there?
Hi, it's Hillary Lane reporting that Mr. Sanders was called back into the command center, but I can fill you in on the briefing that he just gave us. This is the largest emergency and trauma unit in New York City and the second largest emergency unit in the country. They say they are underutilized right now, while the hospitals downtown closer to the Trade Center are absolutely overwhelmed. So they have put out a call to EMS saying, bring people in here. It is an emergency call. What I have seen at this point are some patients staggering and being helped in, nobody in apparently critical condition. The hospital tells us that they've had 65 minor injuries. Those are broken bones, internal injuries, smoke inhalation cases. There have been 10 major
Hillary, I need to interrupt you.
One person brought in.
Hillary, I need to interrupt you. This is a Taliban spokesman talking now in Kabul, I believe. This is coming to us by video phone from Afghanistan. And I am not hearing, and perhaps you guys are, but I am not hearing him.
We should remind our viewers that Afghanistan was one of the sites that was hit 3 years ago by the United States.
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan has already explicitly said its standpoint or its position about terrorism.
The terrorism ټول انواع او ډولونه لکه څنګه چې په افغانستان کې هم ورانه پیش کړي دي او دلته موږ همیشه د تروریزم ښکار شوي یو دلته موږ غندلې دي او په نړیوال سطح باندې هم د دې غندنه کوو.
We have criticized all forms of criticism as Afghanistan has itself faced and has become the victim of terrorism, and we even now criticize these kind of acts.
Terrorism یو ویرونکې داراچونکې او نفرت پېښونکې لاره ده.
Terrorism is a terrifying and hateful hatred or hateful method.
او دغه پیښه چې سوي د بشري پلوه خورا پراخه او لوی ناورین دی.
And this incident is from the humanitarian point of view surely a very vast and very terrifying incident.
Any question?
Any question?
Please. Have you received any kind of information, any kind of communication from the United States or any other organization?
The America Mutahida Ayalati یا د بلوچستان کوم رابطه بشته سره ده؟
نه تر اوسه پورې چا کومه رابطه نه ده کړې او اوس تر ټولو مهمه خبره ده چې هغوی په ژغورنه باندې اخته دي. کېدای شي چې یوازې هغوی ته د تسلیت پیغامونه تللي وي او دا چې اسلامي امارت سره چا تماس نیولی دا خبره تر اوسه پورې نه ده.
No contact up to now. They might be busy or surely they are busy in the rescue operation. So they need condolence, but up to now, no communication from them.
Does the Taliban categorically condemn these attacks on the United States?
Taliban په مرحله‌واره توګه په امریکا باندې دغه حملې وکړي.
موږ د تروریزم ټول انواع همیشه غندلې ده. د پخوا څخه په دې باره کې پالیسي ښکاره وه.
Our policy was very clear from the very beginning, and we have criticized, and even now we criticize terrorism in all its forms.
Can you rule out any involvement by Osama bin Laden?
Osama bin Laden last year, his किस्म का या हर कोई किस्म का last year जाना था स्क्रीन पर आता रहा No, up till now, no one has blamed or accused him formally.
The Taliban have said that they will maintain Mr. bin Laden without communication, unable to communicate. Can you be convinced at this time that your policy of keeping him without communication has been effective in recent months?
तालिबान और जुमाना करे जो सामान लादेन सर बाहर किस्म का इस इत्तिसालाती इम्कानात पर दिन लगी ताकि दा खबर ताई हुई जो उस हम आगे पॉलिसी के दिलाएंगे आगे का
नश पर पॉलिसी की तगड़ न हो रहा है
no change in our policy in this regard.
Do you think the policy is working?
और दा पॉलिसी कार हम कहीं असर करेगा
तेरे खबर
नहीं
Suspicions obviously turn to Osama bin Laden. In the media, he's been mentioned as possibly having a hand in this. Are you concerned that Afghanistan could be on the receiving end of recriminations, of reprisals, of responded attacks?
توجه يا جمان كتوروري مطبوعات يا ميديا جدي منهم أحسده على كذبيسي وتوقع قوية شيء أفغانستان بديه أسلام الوين بديه أسلام الهدف به.
تفكركم كداغنو ما خدتي هم جواز بده فاضل شو بعض تفسيره كتير نمرتي وكلام خاصة.
I think that even if someone has taken his name in the media, might be just because his name was repeatedly mentioned in the past in the comments. Just for this reason, his name might have been repeated.
Just the second half of the question, though, are you concerned that Afghanistan could receive reprise attacks?
We don't see or foresee any difficulty in this regard because there is no argument or no reason for it.
If it were to happen, if there were to be attacks, what would the implications be of such a situation?
If there were attacks from...
As Jonathan said, if there were to be reprisals against Afghanistan, what would the implications of that be?
ما مرتول كل أنواع التروریزم هذا بدولتي شكل بندي كثير يو هواد بل هواد ولي طبعا هذا دولتي تروریزم.
It is a little bit earlier to say at this stage, but as we said that we criticize all forms of criticism. So if Afghanistan is attacked, then we can call it state terrorism.
There's also been concerns expressed about Arab mercenary fighters in Afghanistan and allegations that there may be an Arab connection to these acts of terrorism have also been raised. Can you talk to those concerns? Can you rule out any Arab links?
Afghanistan की अरबी अखबार या बाज़ ग्रुपों चलिए वहाँ दुनिया खतर ऐसा सभी ताशीदी वो लास्ट लोगों ने तो देखी कि हम रदोई
ذكركم شيء دا فيش دير له فيش ودا بدا في chapter مسؤول شيء جرتها مو نجي شيء دا كاروكي دا بكذا شيء يونا إنسافي ويصوم تخمين بني.
It is a very big and enormous incident. So just to connect it with some people that even one's logic cannot even accept it. So in my opinion, it might not be a justifying.
Mr. Madhukil, are you surprised that the United States has received this sort of attack?
The American federal to this Hamalato هدفه بالذات بيبقى مهرانسية.
تبي خبر ده شيء دخل نوي ده بيشة كده إسلام ده كافة تاريخ كم بيرلوي بيشي ده هذا أفر تبي خبر ده حيراني ورد.
Naturally, because this might be the only and the unique kind of incident in the history of the United States. So, like anyone is also
What I'm getting at is do you think the United States has perhaps invited this, given its policy around the world and the growing resentment that some forces feel towards the United States? So what I'm suggesting is that the United States is
It's a Taliban official in Kabul. The relevance here, of course, is that the United States government has blamed the Afghani government for harboring Osama bin Laden, who may or may not be responsible for the events that have happened here in the country today, and therefore the Taliban response. The president, who was in Sarasota, Florida, when President Bush, when the first attack on the Trade Center took place, issued a statement then. He left Sarasota. He is not going back to the White House, at least not yet, but he has told reporters, quote, "We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Make no mistake," said the president, "the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts." The president said the U.S. military has been put on a high alert status and said he had taken security precautions to ensure the government continues to function. And as we said, the president at this moment is not going back to Washington. He has been taken elsewhere for his own safety. There is no reason, by the way, at this point to believe there are continuing threats, but that doesn't mean there aren't any, and the Secret Service is taking no chances, and we can't recall anything even approaching that. We also have a report coming out of London from the Associated Press that followers of Osama bin Laden had warned 3 weeks ago that they would carry out a huge and unprecedented attack on U.S. interests. That, according to a London-based Arab journalist. He adds, they said it would be huge and unprecedented, but did not specify what it was, and we will not assume that this is what it was, but obviously a lot of people are wondering. Joining us on the phone, Richard Holbrooke, former American ambassador to the United Nations, Robert Gates, former head of the CIA, and they join us. Mr. Gates, let me start with you, because I suspect that millions of Americans right now are asking, how could something like this happen? How could it happen?
I think we have to start by acknowledging that we've been both fortunate and capable in the past. This is not the first major attack like this that has been planned. Several years ago, there was a plot to bring down 11 American jumbo jets in Asia that the FBI and U.S. intelligence thwarted, and there have been some other major attacks. So I think that when you have a free and open country as we do, we are vulnerable to this sort of thing, and it is the face of this term that people have been talking about for several years of asymmetric warfare, and it is a way of getting at us, the most powerful military nation in the world, in ways in which we're vulnerable.
Sir, we heard, and perhaps it's given our proximity to the events, it's a little bit unseemly, but we heard a member of Congress but a few minutes ago essentially say that the American government failed its people. Is it fair to say that this is a failure, or we just can't know it all?
Well, personally, I believe that for people to start blaming people and organizations at this point is highly premature. I think that we need to find out just exactly how bad this situation is and deal with it. The idea of starting to cast blame within hours of something having happened is in fact unseemly.
And Ambassador Holbrooke, does the United States in a situation like this go it alone, or does it gather the international community together as one, or as much of one as it can, and try and respond in that form?
Well, first of all, let me say that at this moment, we have to find out what happened down there. I used to work in that building and was there when it was attacked a few years ago. I know that area. My assistant has a cousin who's now missing in the building, and my thoughts are first for the enormous, unbelievable loss of life and tragedy that's going on in Lower Manhattan. Beyond that, Aaron, on your question, this requires a unified international response by all the key member states of the world community, including, very importantly, Russia. And as for the interview you just broadcast by the foreign minister from the Taliban, let's be clear on his attempts to disassociate himself from Osama bin Laden. We don't know at this point who did this, but it was well coordinated and done with a degree of skill which exceeds anything. I think Bob Gates will know better than me, but I think, Bob, this is the most skillful, murderous attack ever in terms of coordination. And I want to be very clear on this. Bin Laden himself, as you just suggested, Bin Laden has said that the Taliban leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar, is the true spiritual leader of the Muslim world. He said that Afghanistan is the purified Islamic State equivalent to Mecca and Medina. And in a tape that the New York Times wrote about 2 days ago, he urged Muslims everywhere, and I'm quoting the New York Times, to migrate to Afghanistan to support the Taliban, saying it's their duty to God, and saying there's now finally a Muslim state that destroys falsehoods and does not succumb to the American infidel and is led by the true believer, Mullah Muhammad Omar, and so on and so forth. So what I want to stress here is that any nation, and this goes for the Taliban and their henchmen in Afghanistan, any nation in the world that harbored anyone associated with this must be treated as though they were part of what is effectively an act of war against the United States. And they cannot hide behind the traditional definitions of difficulty. In the past, we've tried to get Osama bin Laden. He's evaded capture. He almost got killed by a bombing raid 2 or 3 years ago. And I think starting with Afghanistan, we're going to have to hold everyone accountable on the who might have sheltered anyone associated with this act.
So we don't simply, in this conversation, we don't simply hold the group itself, whoever it is, the group itself accountable. We hold anyone accountable, any country, any government accountable if they did nothing to stop it.
Any country which shelters, evades, or helps these people and their cohorts evade capture and the...
Here are the FAA. Now, other things that the government is confirming at this hour. Number one, they received no warnings. They had no hint of any attack against domestic targets in the United States. Number two, they have not received any claim for any of these attacks from anyone. And number three, all
downtown, if they're down there, to put on these respirators, and they're handing them out on the...
Right here is a community college in New York. That college is the triage center for those they've been able to take out. But I can tell you at this point that at least from this vantage point where we have seen most people going in and out, there have been, relatively speaking, very few ambulances going out of here in the last 3 to 4 hours. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, Pat Dawson. One of my colleagues who is right in the middle of the collapse of those buildings is CNBC's Ron Insana, who went down with a cameraman hoping to get close to the World Trade Center, and then it began to come down, the first one. Ron, take us through what you experienced.
Well, Tom, much of the area had been, in fact, cordoned off, and the cameraman from MSNBC and I were trying to get across to the west side of the World Trade Center in order to hook up with the rest of the NBC crews that we knew were there. As we were moving towards the building, we saw the top begin to blow out in a plume of smoke, and we heard the noise associated with an implosion. We turned and immediately ran for cover in the other direction as debris began to rain down. As we made our way, John going straight down the street, I taking a right turn around a corner, it got increasingly dark. The skies blackened as the material just continued to rain down. I hid briefly behind a car, and as the material got thicker and thicker and it became increasingly difficult to breathe, I got inside a parked car, a random parked car, and hid there basically until the material stopped falling. It was pitch black, black as night inside that car, and for several minutes I remained there until some flickers of light were able to be seen. I made my way to a building and joined some police officers who were inside, and as as the blackness began to lift and this gray, thick smoke clung in the air, we were able to find a police car and make our way out of the area. The policeman stopping along the way to pick up 2 injured people and leave them at a Midtown hospital, and subsequently made my way here.
What about collateral damage to other buildings in the area? Those, of course, are the classic canyons of Lower Manhattan, and as that building came down, it did create a kind of tornadic wind that went through there.
Absolutely. Much like the images that were created for the movie Independence Day, when New York was exploding, the corridors of Lower Manhattan are so narrow and channel so much wind, even just on a plain windy day, that this material blew through in a way that was really unimaginable. It was truly frightening. It continued to rain down for several minutes, as you can see there, and the winds just whipped through these corridors for several minutes, eventually calming down to such an extent where there was just a thick gray haze throughout the entire area, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, CNBC's Ron Insana, who was right in the middle of it all today. New York City effectively has been shut down. All tunnels in and out of the city have been closed for security reasons. The airports are closed. The subways are closed. Traffic has been removed from the streets. All hospitals are on extra alert. One right kind of in the middle of it all at Ground Zero is St. Vincent's Hospital. And NBC's Robert Bazell is there, as he has been all morning. Robert, any additional word on casualties?
Well, Tom, actually there have been about 200 casualties, some of them very severe, at least 8 deaths, and 5 of those were firefighters or policemen. We're not sure which one. But one of the things that's amazing about being here is that it has been much slower than anyone anticipated. That's a lot of casualties, of course, and but the casualties have been coming out of Lower Manhattan at a much slower speed than people anticipated. I think just because as one rescue worker who had been down there told me, it's just hell down there. You can't move around. You can't discern who's a body part from a living human being in several of the areas. So we have a very dedicated staff standing by. Large numbers of medical workers are ready to attend to anybody who appears.
Bob.
Several have been very severely injured, but we're still waiting.
All right, Bob. We now have the videotape of President Bush, who was diverted from Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base near Shreveport, Louisiana. This is what he had to say to the nation moments ago.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President George W. Bush, in his capacity today, not only as President of the United States, but also as Commander-in-Chief, as U.S. military forces around the world are on the highest possible alert. There is so much uncertainty in this situation. Who is responsible? When it could happen again, and where? These are questions that are still unresolved as we try to work our way through this day. I'm joined on the telephone now by the former National Security Advisor in the Clinton administration, Sandy Berger, longtime veteran of national security matters in this country. Mr. Berger, in all of your contingency planning during your days in the White House, did you ever anticipate anything like this, 4 hijacked airliners that would be driven into the Twin Trade Towers and the Pentagon?
Well, Tom, I think for some time we have known that terrorism is the greatest security threat that this country faced. We've seen some horrible incidents here before. We broke up a multi-pronged effort on Millennium Weekend, but this certainly goes beyond anything that we have seen before in its dimensions and sophistication.
As we work our way through this day of shock and grief and still trying to count the number of casualties, we also have to say, however, that there has been a stunning failure of intelligence at the highest possible level. The American people are going to wonder why they spent billions of dollars of intelligence if we can't find out about a complex operation like this that involves so many people.
Well, I think all of that is going to have to be sifted out. I think that in the midst of our outrage and anger, President Bush is right. We have to show the world that we will respond to this both with determination and with steadiness. That means first, obviously, focusing on security and on rescue, then on determining who's responsible, and this is of such magnitude that it's inconceivable to me that we will not soon know what the origin of this is, and then how we did not detect this, since it obviously involved a multiple operation based on from the United States. But blame, I think. The blame game, I think, comes, in my judgment, after we do everything we can to take care of the people who are in those buildings. We assure the security of others who may be in situations that are vulnerable, and we find out who is responsible for this absolutely horrifying set of events.
Mr. Berger, it's just not a matter of assigning blame. That's not the question. The question is, how do we get our intelligence back on track so it doesn't happen again in the next 20 minutes or the next 20 hours?
Well, I think we have to recognize that this is the overwhelming security threat to the nation, more so than any foreign nation, more so than long-range missiles. Terrorism has been and continues to be the #1 threat to our people. I think the intelligence community has intensified its efforts over the years, but this simply demonstrates that we're certainly not doing enough.
Sandy Berger, thank you very much for being with us today on what is obviously a day of great trial for this country, a great tragedy, and we have to determine how we go from here once we do begin to sort out just how many lives are lost, who is responsible for all of this, and how we can protect ourselves from this kind of attack again in the future as it continues to play out across America. Robert Knowles is on the phone with us now. He was on the 54th floor, I'm told, of one of the World Trade Center buildings when one of the planes was flown into it. Mr. Knowles, you're safely at home? When one of the planes was flown into it, Mr. Knowles, you're safely at home?
Yes, sir.
Could you turn down your television? I can hear it in the background, and that will cause us some problems if we continue our discussion. Okay. Tell me exactly where you were and what happened to you.
I was on the 54th floor.
Of #1 building or #2?
#1 building.
And when were you first aware of the attack?
Well, something hit the building, and it knocked me to the floor. And then the whole window blew out of the office I was in. And it snatched the desk out of the office like it was a piece of paper.
And how did you get out of that office?
By the grace of God, I was holding on to the door so I wouldn't be sucked out the window.
And then did you go down the stairs?
Yeah, going down the stairs is really rough because it was from the 30th floor down, it was water. the sprinklers was on. And then I pray to God for the people in the wheelchairs because they couldn't get out. They were sitting there waiting for somebody to carry them down.
How many people did you see like that, Mr. Knowles?
2 people. They were invalids. You know, they couldn't get out the wheelchairs. It wasn't a regular wheelchair. It was the kind of wheelchair where they do everything in a wheelchair.
It was a heavy mechanical wheelchair of some kind.
Yes, sir.
And then as you made your way to the bottom of that stairwell, was crowded with other people trying to get out?
Yes, sir, but God bless the fact that it happened early, because if it had happened at 10:30, it would have been chaos because you couldn't get down the stairs. Between the smoke and the lights being out in the water, and the staircase was slippery.
When you finally got to the ground floor, then what happened?
Then they herded us out of the building. They told us to walk fast. We walked up towards Broadway, up Nassau, and it was glass blown from everywhere.
When you were in your office when the first explosion occurred, that was the first building that was hit?
Yes, sir.
And were there lots of people in the building at that hour?
It was a good amount of people, but not lots.
It was not full to capacity?
No, thank God.
And were there other people who, so far as you could tell, were either seriously hurt or killed in the first explosion that you could find?
No, everybody I seen was mobile. They were able to get out the building. You know, people were coughing, people fell down the stairs. They weren't hurt from the explosion. They were hurt trying to get out of the building.
Okay, Mr. Knowles, we wish you the very best, and by the grace of God, you were able to get out of there, and we know that this has been a difficult time for you, but we thank you for sharing your experience with us today.
Thank you.
Going to go to Washington now. Senator John McCain, who has declared this an act of war on the United States. It's already being described as a kind of 21st century Pearl Harbor. Senator McCain.
I think that's accurate in many respects, Tom, although clearly the implications of this are very significant, and including the fact that at least we knew exactly who it was that took these actions against the United States at Pearl Harbor. And obviously at this point we don't know who it was or which organization or nation may have been sponsoring this kind of activity.
We're obviously in the early stages dealing still with the shock and the grief, trying to count the number of casualties, but this country will have to take immediate action in terms of how we rearrange ourselves now to hope that we don't have this happen again. We're going to have some profound changes in America, Senator.
I'm afraid so. I think that our lifestyles will not be the same for a very long period of time because of security requirements. I also think that, as I was watching you earlier, there is going to have to be an evaluation about our intelligence capability, and part of that evaluation will be recognition that we don't have the kind of human intelligence capabilities that perhaps we need. We have excellent technical capabilities, but a lot of times you have to have someone on the ground to penetrate these organizations so you can know their intentions rather than their actions. But look, this is a terrible, unspeakable act. I believe the American people will rally behind and support the President of the United States, and I believe that we will find out who did this, and I think we will respond. And I don't know how you could describe it, very frankly, any other way but an act of war.
You grew up in the conventional military, and we have such an investment in all of that, but for some time, national security officials across all administrations have been saying the great threat to this country is terrorism. Have we devoted enough attention to this kind of an act?
It's very difficult for me to second guess. I think there's going to be plenty of that kind of activity. I would repeat that when I talk to people in the field and when I travel around the world, our lack of human intelligence capability, part of that is the difficulty in penetrating some of these organizations. As you know, they're very difficult, but that may be an area that would have to be addressed. Our technical capabilities, our satellites and others are absolutely superb and sometimes phenomenal. But you've got to divine people's motives. As I said, you've got to get these things before the act is being carried out, and that's probably an area that we have to look at. But I'm sure that that this administration and the Congress will devote all their efforts to making sure not only that the people who perpetrated it are punished, but also that it never happens again.
Senator, is it too early to speculate on whether or not we're going to need protective air cover over the nation's capital and some of our more critical areas?
I don't know. I do know that average citizens are going to find it a much more complicated process going to an airport and getting onto an airplane. That'll be one of the first, obviously, one of the first and necessary evaluations that are needed, because I think it's pretty clear now that these planes were hijacked, and how they were able to do that in the case of at least 4 airplanes is going to be a subject of great interest and perhaps some controversy, because there's been this issue of security at airports for a long period of time. How much inconvenience versus how much security, which has been one debate that's been in Congress and in other areas of government as well. So I think that rather than attacking it from having air cover over the Capitol, perhaps we ought to devote our efforts to going places where these acts of terror originate. That would probably be much more effective and cost-effective as well.
Senator, we're still dealing, as I say, with the initial stages of shock, but in fact, it is hard to overstate the magnitude of all of this or the continuing effect that it will have on the business of this nation.
Oh, I don't. There's never been anything like this in our lifetime. Pearl Harbor was a horrible and dastardly deed, and I don't like to compare it to Pearl Harbor. But this is unprecedented in its scope and frankly, its efficiency.
Senator John McCain, thank you very much for being with us today.
Tom.
Thank you. Under these very difficult circumstances. It's also worth pointing out that in Pearl Harbor, it was a military attack on a military installation. This was an attack by terrorists using innocent Americans, civilians for the most part, in hijacked airliners directed at targets filled with civilians, with the exception of the Pentagon, obviously. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now for an update. 4 planes hijacked today, Bob, 2 United, 2 American. Bring us up to date.
With a total toll just in the airplanes, so thousands dead presumably on the ground, but just in the airplanes, 266 dead. She said 2 American planes, 2 United planes. 2 of those planes were taking off from Boston, 1 from Newark, and 1 from Washington Dulles. 2 went into the World Trade Center buildings, 1 went into the Pentagon, and 1 crashed in rural Pennsylvania with no idea where that one was being hijacked to. At last report, and this report was about 40 minutes ago, there were now only 50 planes left in the air, 50 commercial flights over domestic U.S. airspace. So that is saying no new flights were being allowed to take off, haven't since 9:30 Eastern Time this morning. The planes that were already in the air were allowed to continue on. There were only 50 of those still in the air. They were mostly about 20 minutes away from airports, so presumably almost all of those should have landed by now. There were also 22 international flights still in the air, heading here initially. The word was they were going to be diverted to Canada, and then the decision was made that that would be just too hard for Canadians to handle, and so those 22 flights were going to be allowed to land in the U.S. So far, we don't know of any of them landing. But this is a very important point. The FAA knew of no problems with any of those 50 planes still in the air in the U.S. or 22 in international airspace bound here. So that would seem to indicate that the problems are over in terms of these hijackings. Just to run the flights down very quickly, the first was an American airliner, Boston to Los Angeles. There were 92 killed on board that one. It went into the World Trade Center. That was the first event. Then there was a United plane leaving from Boston. 65 were killed on it. It also went into the World Trade Center. It, too, as the American plane before it, was supposed to have been bound Boston to Los Angeles. Then there was an American airliner leaving from Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles, 64 aboard, and it crashed into the Pentagon. And finally, a United flight leaving Newark Airport bound for San Francisco. It went into rural Pennsylvania, so we don't know what its intended target was. Now, in terms of what Senator McCain was talking about, when you think of a plane being hijacked, you've got to get the hijackers aboard, and you have to get some sort of deathly weapon aboard, like a gun or some explosives. And there are two ways to do that. Either they go through passenger screening and manage to sneak through passenger screening without getting caught, or you get behind the doors somehow and sneak those people aboard behind passenger screening as though they were an airport employee. There have been investigations done on both those things. The FAA tests them a lot with plainclothes people to see if they get through, and every time they do it, a sizable percentage do get through passenger screening with mock weapons or mock explosives. And the same thing on the employees behind the lines. A sizable number do manage to get through the doors. So we'll be seeing in coming days what it was that led to all this. Tom?
Bob, any indication from the FAA of radio traffic indicating that there was a hijacking underway?
No, what it is in the cockpit, presuming that an armed person, in the course of a hijacking, an armed person or somebody with explosives has broken into the cockpit, and the pilot, therefore, cannot say it over the open radio because the hijacker would take action against the pilot. So there's a button that you push, and the button sends out a code, and it tells the appropriate air traffic controllers, and word is flashed to Washington immediately that there's a hijacking in progress. So one could presume that that happened in all 4 of these flights. Of course, we don't know at the moment, but it certainly must have. Then you wonder, too, because the targets were hit so precisely, is that somebody standing behind a pilot and saying, okay, now fly this right into a World Trade Center tower? Or is it an experienced pilot, the hijacker himself, who gets the pilot out of his seat and takes over at the controls to guide it in at the last minute? We don't know, of course. Yeah.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Robert Hager, who will be monitoring the airline part of all of this. The 4 hijacked airliners, in effect, became guided missiles in the hands of terrorists who hijacked the plane. They took innocent people to death with them, 266 altogether. President Bush is at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana at this time. We're told other senior members of the Bush administration are in secure positions. There's code red at the Capitol right now. House Speaker Dennis Hastert was removed to a secure position. All financial markets have been closed down. All national monuments have been evacuated across America in places like Minneapolis, Kentucky, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. A number of critical installations have been closed down as well. This country, the most powerful in the world, has been, in effect, semi-immobilized today by these terrorist attacks. And we can only hope that they are now all over with. When we heard this morning at 8:42 that the World Trade Center had been attacked, we thought that that was a solitary and horrifying event. Not too long after that, the second one was hit. And then NBC's Jim Miklaszewski here on NBC said an explosion was felt at the Pentagon. And that was a plane that went into the Pentagon, another airliner, near the helipad there. It fortunately was on the far side of the building from the most critical offices housing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Intelligence Center, and of course Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, who at first did not want to evacuate the building, and then he was persuaded that that was in the best national interest of this country to do just that. And then, of course, we had the situation in Pennsylvania where a United airliner crashed into the ground. It, too, had been hijacked. James Lee Witt is the former head of the Federal Emergency Administration in the Clinton administration. He was well known during his tenure there because there were so many natural disasters around the country. Mr. Witt, what is FEMA doing at this hour?
Well, Tom, I'm sure that they've already activated the Operations Center and also talking to the City of New York Emergency Management and Governor Pataki's office in putting together whatever resources they can to support their efforts in meeting that immediate need. And I'm sure they're probably activating some search and rescue teams. Probably. Go ahead.
I know, James, from our own experiences together that you had lots of contingency plans for tornadoes and for hurricanes, those kinds of natural disasters. What did you have in planning at FEMA for a terrorist attack?
Well, of course, you know, after the Oklahoma City bombing, Tom, we've worked very hard in putting together a very strong federal response plan in which they have continued to work on, particularly adding the terrorist component to that, and working with the FBI, who will have the lead on this in crisis management. And, of course, FEMA has a consequence management, and I'm sure Director Albaugh and all the staff there are liaisoning with the FBI at this time.
Was that something that you prepared on your own, or did you do that in close coordination and get regular updates from the FBI?
We worked very closely with the FBI, and if there was a threat, then they would notify us and work very closely with them, and as far as having someone in their operations center.
When you look at those pictures of what happened in lower Manhattan, in the canyons of this great city with those two 110-story buildings coming down, you can only imagine what the carnage must be on the ground.
It's probably horrifying, and I saw earlier said it looked like a war zone, and I'm sure it does, and just looking at the pictures. But, you know, there's so many firefighters and police officers that were probably up at the base of that building, probably in that building, trying to get people out, and I'm sure that, you know, the loss is going to be tremendous, and the pain is going to be felt for a long, long time.
Jamie Lee Witt, thank you very much. By the way, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban movement on Tuesday said that Osama bin Laden, they're closely allied with him, was not responsible for the attacks on the United States. What happened in the United States, according to the Taliban, was not a job of ordinary people. It could have been the work of governments. Osama bin Laden cannot do this kind of work. Neither can we, a Taliban spokesman said from the southern city of Kandahar. The Taliban, of course, a very militant and very conservative Islamic organization, and widely believed to be harboring Osama bin Laden, a very wealthy Saudi dissident who has a very sophisticated apparatus at his disposal. He has not been seen for some time, although he does appear from time to time on some Islamic media outlets. One reporter who has been in touch with him said that 3 weeks ago he said an attack was planned on the United States, but that, of course, has not yet been verified. He is, at the moment, I think fair to say, at the top of everyone's list of suspects. But as we have learned on these occasions in times past, it's often not the best thing to do to make a premature judgment. There is the picture that we have often seen of him as he has declared a holy war against the United States. Let's go to General Norman Schwarzkopf now, who had the Southern Command and, of course, commanded the forces during the Persian Gulf War. General Schwarzkopf, I've been trying to review in my own mind the incidents in which the United States has been a conspicuous participant or absent in the past month or so. We lost a spy plane over southern Iraq. We've stepped up pressure on southern Iraq. Obviously, in the Middle East, in the ongoing dispute between the Palestinians and the Israelis, there's a great feeling that the United States is siding only with the Israelis. The war in Sudan goes on, but we've not taken an active role there. Are there any other signs on your radar screen that would indicate that this kind of thing was likely to happen?
Well, you know, Tom, the truth of the matter is that most of the Middle East countries consider the United States to be, you know, the main source of support for Israel. It isn't isolated just in certain states. And, you know, any one of those people, if you got them aside and asked them truthfully, they would tell you that they were not in favor of our policies with regard to Israel.
So do you think that that probably was the cause of all this continual escalation that has been going on between Palestine and Israel? And there's been an absence of participation, I think that it's fair to say, on the part of this administration and all of that.
Well, I think that's kind of speculation at this time. I certainly think that you know, the reason why the United States is hated in so many places in the Middle East is with regard to the support of the state of Israel. And as a matter of fact, they'll openly state that if Israel had not had the support of the United States, it wouldn't exist today. So they go so far as to say that.
There are people, many people, still trapped.
When you and I were talking earlier, we were commenting on the sophistication of this attack and the complexity of that. Doesn't that stun you some?
It really does. I mean, just what was mentioned by, you know, by Robert Hager, the fact that undoubtedly, you know, I can't see any U.S. commercial airline pilot flying their plane directly into an obstacle like that. Undoubtedly, there was, you know, somebody at the controls that was able to guide the plane there. That in itself is kind of scary. I told you earlier about the fact that it bothers me that with all the devices we have against hijackers, that hijacking can still take place on this scale and organized in that fashion. That causes me concern. I certainly agree with what Senator McCain said about the fact that, you know, many years ago, we abandoned human intelligence. The attitude was that only bad guys have spies. and good guys don't need spies, and we put satellites in the air, and we put a huge amount of investment into technical intelligence. At the same time, we dismantled human intelligence. I don't know what the status of that is today, but we damn sure need to get somebody inside these organizations. I would tell you that...
General, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment because we're looking at some scenes that we have not yet had an opportunity to see. It does look like a nuclear winter in lower Manhattan. It is one of the most vital areas anywhere in the world, obviously. The home of the financial markets, the World Trade Center, lots of residences. There's been a real revival down there in recent years, and it has a great gray pall of dust and smoke and debris, and of course, overlaying all of that is the psychological effect of knowing that there could be a casualty list in terms of fatalities that could go into the thousands.
Yeah. I mean, Pearl Harbor, we lost 2,400. And, you know, when you hear the numbers today, it's hard to believe that we're not going to greatly exceed that number.
And as I pointed out earlier, in Pearl Harbor, it was a military attacking a military installation. This was the use of innocent people in commercial airliners to attack other innocent people in New York. There was one military target, obviously the Pentagon. You can see, if you're looking at this with me, General, the extent of the damage in lower Manhattan.
Yeah, unbelievable. Unbelievable. And you know, it's the natural inclination is, okay, we got to hit somebody back. And in this case, what's going to, you know, be even more frustration to the national psyche is you can't hit back. You know, you don't. Who you're going to hit at this stage of the game?
Yeah. Thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf. We'll ask you to stand by. We'll be coming back to you. This is as effective as a bomb being dropped there. There were two bombs in effect. Commercial airliners flown into those two buildings, and they came down. We presume because of the initial explosion, there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists. Robert Harper was one of those who was in the area when all of this occurred. Mr. Harper?
Yes. Tom, how are you today?
Tell me where you were when the first plane flew into the first building.
I was down below the World Trade Centers. I was arriving at work just a little late, and the first plane had crashed into the building, so there were many people, you know, sort of standing around. There were EMS workers running around as well, and you could see the second plane coming around, and everyone sort of pointing up, and then that second plane just crashed into the building.
And what about people who were trying to get out of the building? We had one report of bodies falling through the air and people jumping from windows. Did you see any of that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a very traumatic day, I think, having seen that, because where the initial explosion was, there was a lot of black smoke coming out of around, I believe it was around the 78th floor, and you saw people jumping for their lives out of the 78th floor of the World Trade Center. Smoke everywhere, fire everywhere, and people were continuing to jump out of the 78th floor. So people began to run away because once the second explosion happened, the debris that was caused by that began to fall everywhere, and everybody just started running toward the mayor's office. You know, I began to run toward the Woolworth building, which was close to that, and then as I got closer to that, I realized if, you know, the top of the World Trade Center hit the Woolworth building, that building too would be affected, and it might also fall down.
Did you have a sense right away that these buildings could come down?
Not initially. For about 15 minutes or so, people only thought, you know, they couldn't really tell what had happened. And only after the second plane hit did people realize that, you know, this is probably something that was orchestrated. And so then people initially who had, you know, been trying to go back to the scene and try to help people realized that another plane had hit the building. And that's when people said, look, this can't have been a mistake.
Where are you now?
I'm outside of the emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital. I've just been released for smoke inhalation. I've been in the hospital there. They rushed me to the hospital, you know, not too long after that, because the black soot and everything that was associated with the building, I mean, heavy black smoke engulfed the entire financial district. You know, from 9 o'clock onward, and we were sitting on the side of the road. EMS workers were there administering oxygen to people, thinking that everything was okay. And then as they began to realize that the explosion might have caused so much trauma to both the World Trade Center that they would fall, then everybody just began to run because they saw that the building itself was actually going to fall. So all of the people that had gone to help out were then put in, you know, double danger, because you were then running, and the building literally literally came and fell, over the entire financial district area. It was a complete nightmare. Black smoke everywhere. People were running toward the Brooklyn Bridge, running away from the mayor's office, afraid that the falling part of the World Trade Center would hit other buildings, and that would cause a topple effect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper, and thank God you're okay, and I hope that you'll be able to deal with all of this. We do appreciate
it's been a real mess, and I can't, coming back in the ambulance, somebody said, one of the things that they remembered, thinking about is the date today is September 11th, so 9/11. So, it's something that can't really go without notice, is that this was completely planned, completely orchestrated. Whoever did this has been planning this obviously for a very long time.
Thank you very much, Robert Harper, who was one of the survivors who was just a little bit late to work this morning, but then got caught in the devastating attack on the Twin Trade Towers. It's hard for me to overstate to people who are unfamiliar with New York just how dynamic that area is in terms of people coming and going. The two towers are 110 stories high, or they were. 20 to 50,000 people would work in them at any one time. It's just a few blocks from the stock market and from many of the principal banks in America, to say nothing of residential areas. And we will not know for some time what the death toll is there, to say nothing of the number of people who have been injured, so many of them with burns. Let's go to Washington now, and NBC's Washington Bureau Chief, Tim Russert. Tim, give us the state of play in the nation's capital right now. We know that the White House and the State Department and CIA have been evacuated. Dennis Hastert has been removed. Where is Dick Cheney at this hour? Do we know?
Tom, he is in a secure location. They won't tell us exactly, but I do know that he is there with his top-level aides. We have heard from some of those people. He has been in constant communication with the President of the United States and the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice. Tom, I've been speaking to people in the intelligence and law enforcement community, in and out, those who have served, those who are serving now. No one is the least bit surprised that there was a terrorist attack on the shores of America. Every person, to a man and woman, absolutely stunned, not only by the magnitude, but by the precision of this attack. They are absolutely convinced that there's only a few cells that could possibly have done this. And this is quite interesting because I didn't realize it until it was pointed out to me. Every one of the 4 hijacked planes that Bob Hager talked to you about was bound for California. In the words of this high-ranking official, the bastards knew they all had a plane full of fuel for the maximum impact upon collision. There is, in my experience in Washington, unprecedented anger here, but no one knows how or where to channel it. Right now, the situation is a bit chaotic. Communication is difficult, but the Bush administration is underscoring that the President is in charge, in command, in constant communication, and will bring these people to justice. They just know it's going to take a long, long time.
Tim, it's also going to be a test of the political maturity, if you will, of Washington. It's a city that has been so riven by what many would describe as petty political disputes. But this is one nation on this day.
Suddenly, the Social Security lockbox seems so trivial, Tom. One official said to me, Tim, your life is going to change, but more important, your son's life is going to change forever. America will never be the same after September 11th, 2001. The levels of security, heightened tension, the way we look at each other and look at our institutions will in fact be altered. That will bring some gratitude, if you will, to the terrorist. And that's why we as a nation, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, are, as they talk with one another today, are absolutely unified in their attempt to strike back, but also try to put salve on the national psyche so we don't become an armed camp resisting an enemy we really can't identify and never know when is striking.
Because the consequences psychologically for this country are every bit as great as they are physically for America as well. It is worth pointing out, I suppose, that we all breathed a great sigh of relief when the Cold War came to an end with the collapse of communism. And yet there was nothing as devastating as this for this country during that long, cold twilight that we faced down communism in Moscow with its considerable nuclear arsenal, which it still has in place, obviously.
You know, Tom, it's a very important point because all during this past few weeks, the debate about missile defense systems, many people were saying publicly, even those proponents or the detractors, well, you know, we're a long way from research on this, but there is a potential threat of a rogue nation launching a missile or an accidental launch from Russia or China modernizing their force. But everyone kept saying the true risk, the real risk is terrorist attack, and we plain don't know how to defend ourselves. But again, and let me underscore this, people are absolutely stunned, disbelieving that something so well coordinated, something is with a tick-tock like this, 4 hijackings within a matter of an hour, and then being able to take those very planes and drive them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And there is growing suspicion, Tom, here, that the plane that landed, it crashed in Pennsylvania, was most likely headed for the Capitol or White House. That's the operating theory of many of the people I've spoken to today.
Thank you very much, NBC's Tim Russert. The equation has changed for all of us personally and professionally in the course of the last several hours, and we'll be dealing with this for a long, long time. But first we want to take you through the eyewitness accounts of people who were witness to what happened here on a very sunny early fall morning in New York today. Some of the eyewitnesses.
I spent a year in combat. I never saw anything like this. I saw a lot of people die, but nothing this devastating.
We carried a bunch of people that we found laying in the debris. There was complete darkness. We stumbled over some people. We picked them up and carried them across the street.
You could hear the rumbling. When you looked up, you could see the top of the building just crumbling.
Then there was a haunting story from an eyewitness that we heard from a few moments ago of people in wheelchairs who were unable to get out of the building as he ran down the stairs, and he was obviously overcome with emotion as he described that for us. We don't have any numbers for you. We're trying to be as circumspect as we can be. All public officials are saying that they expect the final death toll to be horrendous, but this business of determining how many people are still in the rubble will take many, many hours, if not days, to determine. Here is a quick summary of what we have been through today in this country. On the 11th of September, the year 2001, at 8:42 this morning, first one plane that had been hijacked crashed into the World Trade Center. Then, not too long after that, a second plane. About an hour later, the Pentagon was attacked by a hijacked airliner, and then came word that another hijacked airliner had crashed outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When we saw the first reports and witnessed, those of us who live in New York, of the World Trade Center being hit by an airplane, at first all of us thought, I'm sure, that it had to be some kind of a terrible accident. And then, when we heard that a second plane, and you could see it flown deliberately into the World Trade Center, the horror of this terrorist war began to unfold, and it continues to unfold here now almost 5 hours later. And we'll be continuing to cover this across America and in the nation's capital. NBC's Pat Dawson has been not too far from the World Trade Center throughout most of the day, where it has been chaotic and terrifying. Pat?
Tom, as you point out, we try not to exaggerate very much in this circumstance, and yet in many ways it's hard not to exaggerate just the things we have been seeing and the things that we have been told. I think it is fair to say that the task that now confronts rescue workers here is Herculean, a very, very difficult task, and it is of two parts. It has been about 3 hours since what we might call the last catastrophic incident in a morning of catastrophes. That is since the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which used to stand behind me just about 10 blocks south, right below there. It used to tower above the buildings, which you can see, and obviously it is no longer there, nor is the South Tower. 3.5 hours since that happened. There have been no catastrophic incidents since then, but it has affected the rescue effort clearly because they are afraid of what could happen, what still might happen, since there were a sequence of catastrophes, if you will. That has made the rescue very, very difficult. At this point, we are being told unofficially that there may be as many as 200 to 300 rescue workers who are actually down there. We have seen pictures of some of them. They are down around the base of this building. They are beginning the, again to use that word, Herculean task of trying to find the people who might be alive in that debris. We know that there are a great number of people who are dead in there. Unquestionably, what they are hoping to find is survivors, and at this point they really can't speculate on how many there are, how many there could be, and I don't think it really serves us at this point to speculate on the numbers that it could be. One of the tasks though, is to try to get this rescue effort in its entirety going. And as you can see behind me down here, there are probably hundreds of New York City and New York State and federal rescue people who are involved, fire, police, emergency service, quite a few. In addition to those, the task is certainly aided by the American Red Cross's disaster relief teams. They are here on the scene. This is Frank Donahue, who is with the American Red Cross. Frank, tell me first of all, as you start out here, what is it you're trying to do?
Well, our immediate purpose is to kind of assess what role the Red Cross can play initially, and certainly it's to help the emergency medical people that are here provide any kind of relief and support we can for them. People being evacuated from neighborhoods need a place to go, and the Red Cross is setting up service centers and shelters. There's one at Grand Central Station and Penn Station. And then the blood supply, making sure we have a safe blood supply, not only here, but throughout the country.
Do you have any idea, have you heard, how many casualties have been dealt with so far?
No, I have not. I'm sorry. I have not heard that.
Is it now, part of your task, though, is also to provide blood supplies. Obviously, that will be needed in huge
Absolutely, and people throughout the country are responding. They should call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. It's important to know that this incident, and you know, there's blood needed here in Altoona, there's blood needed all throughout the country that's been affected by this disaster. Another part is people that are moving around, are traveling today. No airport in this country is open, and so Red Cross volunteers are in every airport providing assistance to families. Families are calling the Red Cross here in New York as they are calling their local Red Cross to try to communicate and find the well-being of people that were in this building, as well as people in the other affected areas. So
you were also telling me about grief counseling and dealing with people who've been traumatized around the country, maybe at other airports.
Absolutely. Boston, for example, LAX, where those airplanes were coming from and headed to, we have Red Cross mental health worker volunteers there that are providing assistance to families. And again, that's happening throughout the country where people have been affected by this disaster. Here in New York alone, the Greater New York Red Cross has had lots of experience at the World Trade Center a number of years ago. Today, there's about 1,200 local Red Cross volunteers here in New York providing food and shelter, direction, and support to people that are incredibly affected by this incident.
And how many Red Cross workers do you think around the country?
Oh, a number of thousand, a couple thousand for sure. I know in Philadelphia, where I came from, we're on standby working with emergency management. It's the same thing in every major metropolitan area that Red Cross workers work closely with emergency management.
Frank, thank you so much for taking some time out. We appreciate it. That was Frank Donahue, the American Red Cross. Tom, that brings you pretty much as much information as we have here in what remains a fairly chaotic situation. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pat Dawson. As the shock begins to wear down, we're going to all of us are going to have our patience tested as well as we await these reports. We'll try to deal with it as factually as we possibly can. It does now appear that the wave of attacks is over. We could not be certain of that just a few hours ago, as there were these reports of planes that were still in the air, some that had been hijacked, and their destinations were uncertain at that time. This is a live picture of Lower Manhattan, missing two of its most familiar profiles, obviously. The twin trade towers of the World Trade Center, iconic buildings here in New York, really representing, symbolic, if you will, of the enormous economic strength of this country. They sustained an attack in 1993. They were reopened. The country came back from that, and we went about our merry way again, thinking that in Fortress America, this couldn't possibly happen, but of course it has. Neil Livingston is one of the most widely recognized experts on international terrorism. Mr. Livingston, we keep coming back to the same issue. This was a very sophisticated attack. This was not just a lone suicide bomber of some kind. 4 hijackings simultaneously. Obviously someone in the cockpit who knew how to get the plane to the targets that they wanted to get them to. And it had to have happened over a long period of time, and they were all transcontinental flights loaded with fuel.
Tom, this is our worst case nightmare scenario, the one that we've hoped would never happen, and that would be a multiplicity of targets with a multiplicity of highly sophisticated bombs, in this case aircraft, and very symbolic targets. And so this great deal of thought went into this, a great deal of time and money. This kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. So we can anticipate that maybe a year or more was probably devoted to planning this attack, and there may be others coming.
Mr. Livingston, I remember that the FBI has been concerned for some time about the number of cells harboring terrorists in America that have been growing. Is that true?
Well, there clearly are a number of people in the United States that have been the beneficiaries of our relatively liberal immigration policy that have hidden within various communities here and have expressed very strong anti-American sentiments. Whether that can be translated into terrorism at this point is open to question. I would suspect that what we will see in this case are perhaps foreign nationals who have arrived in the United States strictly to carry out this mission, hijack these aircrafts, and take them to their targets. Very similar to what we saw in that millennial potential attack when a man was arrested at the border in Washington State who was going to carry out bombing attacks in the United States. He was an outsider who had been sent here to do that.
All right, Neil Livingston, thank you very much. I also have on the phone now Anthony Lake, Tony Lake, a former National Security Advisor to President Clinton, who's been a longtime student of the prospect of terrorism in this country, recently wrote a riveting fictional account of the various scenarios that the United States may have to deal with. But even in your most wildest imaginative days, Tony, you could not have anticipated something like this.
No, it's terrible. It's hard to say you can be lucky in any respect in something in such a catastrophe. But one of the great dangers still lurking out there is that it could have involved some kind of weapon of mass destruction.
But at the same time, it's hard to understate the amount of damage that has been done here physically and certainly in terms of loss of life. When you have an institution like the Pentagon attacked, the World Trade Center is attacked, and the plane that went to Pittsburgh might have been headed for the Capitol or the White House, for God's sake.
Yes. No, this is terrible. As I said, a catastrophe. Clearly a very sophisticated terrorist attack. Our intelligence community has headed off some in the past year or two. Their ability to evade our usual intelligence gathering methods in order to pull this off is extraordinary. And one question now we need to focus on is not only why did this happen, but where do we go from here?
Well, short term, if you were the National Security Advisor now back in your old office in the White House, what would be your recommendations in terms of a suppression of some of our normal liberties that we have in this country?
Well, we mustn't defeat our liberties in trying to defend them. I think what I would be urging now is, first of all, of course, get all the information we can immediately while dealing with the human dimensions of this catastrophe. And then thinking ahead, I think there are three fronts we have to act on. One, there must be, once we have identified the source of this, there must be an American response to this of some kind. Secondly, I hope that this will encourage us to even think in new ways about the nature of our security threats and increase our preparations, for example, for the Coast Guard in defending our ports against possible incidents like this, customs, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and improving our organization for dealing with catastrophes like that. There's been progress on all these fronts, but not enough. And finally, and I think this is very important, we need to recognize that there is only one group out there that is trying to kill Americans, and that are these terrorists. We are at war with them, and it is not enough for us to attack simply on an American basis. We need to develop a global strategy for a global alliance, for a global war against these terrorists, including, for example, making sure that any nation pays a terrible price when it provides sanctuary for terrorists.
Thank you very much, Anthony Lake, former National Security Advisor to President Clinton, now an author and professor here in the eastern part of the United States. We were just told that the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has stopped all civil flights over Great Britain, whether that was precautionary or in response to a threat that his government received. We cannot say, but all flights there have been canceled. Let's just take you through now a quick summary that does not begin to tell the true story of this day, but it is a kind of a checklist of what we've been through. 4 airliners, 2 American, 2 United, headed for California from Washington and Boston, were hijacked, 2 flown into the World Trade Center here in New York, 1 into the Pentagon, 1 crashed outside of Pittsburgh. The World Trade Center, 2 110-story buildings collapsed completely in lower Manhattan. We're showing you Somerset County, the airport near Pittsburgh, where the other United plane went down. All of this happened in the eastern seaboard, but That's just the geographical connection. This is a wound on America wherever you live, whatever your ideology may happen to be, unless you are in sympathy with the terrorist beliefs. And when those two twin trade towers went down, of course, that caused even more damage to lower Manhattan. At the same time, the Pentagon was attacked by one of the hijacked airliners. A number of dead in the Pentagon as well, in the outer rings, first and second rings near the helipad there. President Bush was diverted from Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. We're told that Vice President Cheney is in a secure position. We don't know exactly where that is. The third in the line of succession is the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert. He was told there's a code red, and he was taken to a secure position as well. All financial markets have been closed down. Hospitals in New York City over attacks. The world's largest, busiest city is at the moment all but shut down, with tunnels in and out of the city that have been closed for security reasons, traffic off the streets. 30 Rockefeller Plaza, where we work, and other midtown high-rise buildings have been evacuated for this day. All the subways are closed down. Across America, national monuments and other high-rises have been evacuated for the day as well as part of the precaution. Still, no claim of responsibility by any one group.
You're watching KSL 5. This is the #1 Eyewitness News Special Report.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to break away from our NBC coverage for just a few moments now to bring you up to date on today's events. A day so horrible, it will be indelibly etched in the American psyche for centuries to come. September 11th. 2001.
If for some reason you have not heard, let us recap today's horrific events. It all began just before 7 o'clock this morning Mountain Time when a hijacked commercial jetliner with passengers on board was deliberately flown into one of the two towers of the World Trade Center. As Americans watched in horror, a second jetliner dove low and then slammed into the other tower.
We heard a loud boom, and we said, "What was that?" And I ran out to the window, and I look out and I see smoke. The next thing I saw, I mean, you got to look at it, the bottom elevator, the glass, just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
Now, an estimated 20,000 people were in the two towers. At the time, it is not known at this point how many of them died or survived. Then, as emergency crews were scrambling in Manhattan, another plane slammed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and that prompted an emergency evacuation of the White House and the Congress and all other federal buildings. A short time later came word of another hijacked plane in the air. It was reportedly headed for the nation's capital, but then another commercial jetliner crashed near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a few miles away from the airport. It too had been hijacked, and that means in all 266 lives were lost on board these hijacked planes.
But the horror was not over. As the world watched on live television, one of the two World Trade Center towers collapsed, raining dust, debris, and death on the streets of lower Manhattan. It wasn't long before the second tower collapsed. Again, the streets of Manhattan were chaos. As you see, this is video of that second jetliner crashing into the second tower there as it almost sliced through the south tower of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And then it was a short time later that both towers collapsed. Now, in just a few moments, we're going to rejoin NBC's coverage of today's events. But first, we want to bring you up to date on how this terror has affected Utah. We have team coverage for you.
That's right. News specialist Stacey Butler is live at the state capitol. Also, we have John Hollenhorst at the Salt Lake International Airport, where all flights are grounded. We have Carol Makita with a look at what Utah religious communities are doing. First, though, we begin with Ski Utah's Nathan Rafferty, who was in Manhattan and was near the World Trade Center this morning, and he was an eyewitness to all the terror. He joins us now by telephone. Thanks for joining us, Nathan.
Anytime.
Describe what you saw.
Well, I was down lower Manhattan this morning for a meeting with a journalist, and that meeting took place at 8:30 a.m. As we walked out of the restaurant, the maitre d' said, "Oh my gosh, have you heard what's happened? A plane clipped the World Trade Center. Go look right around the corner." And I thought to myself, it's got to be some kind of horrible accident, but how could a pilot be so far off course that he hits the World Trade Center? And we walked around the corner, and you're looking straight up at a gaping hole with fire coming out of it. I mean, just an unbelievably surreal scene. I felt like I was in the middle of some B-rated movie.
Second plane hit the Trade Center.
I'm sorry?
As you looked up, did you see the second plane hit the Trade Center?
No, I got there just after the second plane had hit, and we had moved on, and we were everybody was just watching in disbelief. There was a crowd down there, and we were fairly close, and we were listening to a radio that somebody had. That there was a truck parked nearby. The guy had his door open, and we were all listening to the news reports of what was happening. All of a sudden, you looked up, and the first building that had collapsed was gone. It fell right down right before our eyes, and before you knew it, everybody started running for northern parts and getting out of the way of the cloud and the smoke, the debris that was coming down, and it was pandemonium at that point. But I mean, it's been a crazy day.
Were you caught in that cloud of smoke and debris?
No, I was lucky enough to be far enough away from it, but close enough where it was a bit unsettling.
How far away are you now?
I'm back up in Times Square, up on the 30th floor of a hotel.
And what's the scene there?
Times Square, normally lunchtime on a Tuesday, is jam-packed. There's not a car down there. A bunch of buses are backed up, and it looks like their drivers are out. There are a few people milling around, but it's just this kind of state of shock, and I think a little bit of the atmosphere is still unsettling. So much has happened today. You're looking over your shoulder every time you hear a noise to, who knows what's going to happen next. So it doesn't really feel like there's anywhere safe in town, and so one place isn't better than others.
Are there any special security precautions being taken where you are now? Are you locked in or out of your hotel or anything like that?
As I walked in, it sounded like the security at the hotel here. I'm at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. They were getting ready to batten down the hatches. I believe many of the stores that I walked by had closed their grates, and with so many people running around, and who knows what's going to happen. I think people were just preparing the lockdown. Tunnels. Apparently all the tunnels and the bridges to get off of Manhattan had been closed. I don't know if they've been reopened now, but they've been telling everybody that works here that they should just go home, and people like us that are here for business are just kind of caught in a state of limbo. It feels safe at the moment, but it felt safe at 8:30 this morning, too.
Okay, Nathan Rafferty, thank you for sharing your perspective of this horrific day.
All right, you're welcome.
Thanks. This tragedy has raised a lot of questions in the minds of all of us, questions about any immediate risk here in Utah and the potential for risk come February when the 2002 Winter Olympics come to our state.
We continue our team coverage now with news specialist Stacy Butler at the state capitol. Stacy?
Well, after meeting with state public officials this morning, the governor announced the state of Utah has no reason to believe that people or buildings here are at risk. In a somber address today, the governor expressed grief for the lives lost, but he reassured Utahns that for the most part, it is business as usual. All state employees, though, are on heightened alert. They are to wear their ID badges, and most deliveries to state buildings have been halted today, but there are no plans to close state buildings and schools.
This is a sobering reminder that there are evil people in the world who will do outrageous and unthinkable things. Public safety and security have always been a priority in our planning for the Games. We have a strategic plan in place, and we'll continue to execute on it. Today's tragedy only strengthens that resolve, that we will do all that is humanly possible to prevent such an occurrence from disrupting that remarkable celebration.
Obviously, with the Olympics just 5 months away, security for the Games here in Salt Lake City is of grave concern to state officials. The Utah Public Safety Commissioner says for 5 years, experts have discussed what could happen at the Olympic Games. The possibility of suicide attacks and bombings has come up, but few believed it could ever happen. After today, that is no longer the case.
It really sets us back on our heels a bit to go back and reaffirm that what we're doing is right, we're on track with what we're doing, and we're not overreacting. So what it changes our commitment levels, and I think those who have been critical of our preparations.
Now, the Utah Federal Building is open today, but we were just there this morning and we watched as employees filed out. Apparently, each department is allowing employees to leave at their will. For those of us at work, for those downtown in offices, for those in state buildings, once again, it is business as usual. But then again, it is anything but that. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Stacy Butler, Eyewitness News.
All right, thank you very much, Stacy.
Now, the most obvious impact to Utah is the grounding of all aircraft nationwide. As you know, the borders with Canada and Mexico are closed right now.
We have news specialist John Hollenhurst out at the Salt Lake International Airport where he's been all morning. John, what's the situation out there now?
Well, Terry, we've got thousands of people out here just reeling from the shock of this strange episode where airliners have been turned into weapons of war. We have people scrambling to improvise alternate travel plans now that all flights here have been canceled for an unknown length of time. We have hundreds of people that have been on the phone. In fact, I've never seen so many cell phones and pay phones in use at one time in my life. People trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B, and now that there's no airline connecting those points. The rental car agencies were swamped with people, and they were quickly out of rental cars. Obviously, there is a national shortage of rental cars today because all the flights are grounded. Let's hear what some of the travelers had to say.
We got the last rental car here at National, so we're real glad. We're just going to try to drive.
All the way back to Little Rock?
Yes, it'll take us 4 or 5 days.
I think we're going to drive back. I don't want to get on a plane right now.
Trying to get to Sacramento.
How are you going to do it?
I might have to wait. Yeah, not a lot of options. Tragedy, just a tragedy. A lot of individuals here that don't have any other options either.
The airport officials are unable to give us an exact count, but we think about 5 airliners landed here that were not scheduled to land here, but when the government ordered a shutdown of all flights, many of those pilots just headed for the nearest airport that could handle them. We know that at least 1 international flight came in here. It was a Japan Airlines flight, a wide-body jet that landed. We've seen some activity on the east side of the airport around the National Guard terminal. We believe what's going on there is that firefighters from Utah are loading up to be flown by the military to New York to help with that massive rescue and cleanup effort that's going to be occupying the city of New York for days and weeks to come. Terrible tragedy. A lot of people here in Salt Lake touched by it and trying to figure out how their lives proceed from here. Back to you.
John, we had a report earlier this morning that a couple of commercial flights had been diverted to Cedar City. Do you know anything about that?
I have heard that, but I don't know any details. That would be unusual, but not perhaps unexpected in this situation. As I say, apparently the pilots were given the option of either completing their flight or flying to the nearest airport, and many of them did exercise that option.
All right, John Hollenhurst, thank you very much for that update. Well, with planes grounded, stranded passengers will be undoubtedly looking for any other way to get home, and Greyhound, they should know, is not an option. Greyhound has halted intercity bus service throughout much of the country today. Bus service is canceled in the northeast of a line from Cleveland to Columbus, Ohio, Charleston, West Virginia, and Richmond and Norfolk in Virginia. Greyhound has also closed all of its terminals within a mile of any federal office building, including Salt Lake City, where the operation has been moved temporarily to the Econo Lodge, that's farther west on North Temple. We've also been told that Amtrak is shut down nationwide, so indeed anybody trying to travel today is up against some serious obstacles.
Now, we also want to point out today that of the 4 airplanes hijacked and crashed, 2 were United flights, 2 were American flights, coast-to-coast flights. We want to give you these numbers now in case you have a loved one on any United or American flight today and are concerned at this time. United Airlines toll-free number 1-800-932-8555, and American Airlines 1-800-245-0999. Both airlines have set up these numbers so you who have loved ones on board an American or United flight can call and check on their status at this time. Now, Utah's religious leaders are also reacting to today's horrific attack on America. They're offering words of sympathy and opening their churches to all people.
Religion specialist Carol Makita joins us now live from just outside St. Mark's Cathedral in downtown Salt Lake. And Carol, we understand the Episcopal Diocese has a number of services planned today?
That's right, Kim. There is a prayer service that just got underway a few moments ago here at the Episcopal Cathedral, and there will be such prayer services every hour on the hour through 5 o'clock, and then once again at 8 p.m. this evening. I spoke a little earlier today with the Bishop, Carolyn Tanner Irish, who said she wanted to make sure that people of all faiths knew they were welcome to come, that there would perhaps be some comfort today if all people joined in prayer. I also understand, I'm not sure we have video of this yet, but at about 11 o'clock this morning, There was a special prayer service at Marriott Center at Brigham Young University. It was a previously arranged devotional that was canceled so that students and faculty could meet together and pray for everyone involved in this terrible tragedy. I also spoke with public relations people at the church just a few moments ago and said that the headquarters and all of church buildings are open and church security is taking just simple appropriate measures in this situation. There were also missionaries who were in the Washington, D.C. and New York City area. They're all safe. 21 missionaries left Salt Lake this morning, headed to New York City, but they were diverted to Denver and will stay there. The others that were to fly out of Salt Lake City have gone back to the MTC in Provo. Now, here's a list of prayer services that will go on around our area this evening. The Cathedral of the Madeleine will hold a special Mass at 5:15 tonight. Here at St. Mark's, as I mentioned, every hour through 5 and then at 8 p.m. The Salt Lake Christian Center is having a special vigil from 5 to 8 p.m. It is open all day and says that stranded visitors may stay in its gymnasium. The Unitarian Church has a meeting at 8 o'clock tonight. The United Methodist Church in West Jordan, which is still under construction, that's 90th South, 32nd West, will have a meeting on its property at 6:30, a prayer meeting. The Community United Methodist Church, Laker Way in Ogden, will have a meeting at 7 p.m. and the First United Methodist Church in Ogden will be open every night at 7 o'clock. I have a statement from the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City. This is from Monsignor J. Terrence Fitzgerald, who said today, like all Americans, we of the Catholic community are shocked and grieved by the reported attacks on our country and its citizens. Such violence is senseless and profoundly disturbing. At this time, we join other people in prayer for national calm, compassionate response, and support for victims and their families. We ask God's guidance on our nation and its leaders as we respond to this tragedy. I believe Terry and Kim, you may now also have a statement from the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
All right, Carol, thank you so much.
Well, we'll get to that possible statement in just a few moments. Thank you, Carol. We reported earlier this morning that with 50 commercial jetliners still in the air over the United States, as John Hollenhorst also said, pilots were being told to land wherever they wished. If they wanted to go on to their destination, they were free to do so. If they wanted to land at the nearest airport, they were free to do so. One unconfirmed report that came in earlier was that 2 planes had perhaps landed in Cedar City. We just asked John Hollenhorst about that. However, we have just received word from the Cedar City Airport that no commercial jetliners have landed in that town. Now, Washington political leaders have also been whisked away from federal buildings, away to other safe areas. Lawmakers will not be resuming their business on the Hill for at least the day, according to one political aide. Utah's leadership on Capitol Hill was also quick to respond to today's attack. Here's what Senator Orrin Hatch had to say. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims of this terrible tragedy. This is a time when our nation must stand strong together against cowardly acts of terrorism directed against our citizens. I assure you that this nation has a strong resolve and will not tolerate any aggression on our soil. We will stop these terrorists in their tracks. We will hunt them down and bring them down. We will stop at nothing to avenge these evil acts. I consider these actions against our nation and our citizens as an act of war.
And Senator Bob Bennett is comparing this day to another day of infamy. He says we are at war. This is Pearl Harbor. This is serious. The death toll will be as great. The surprise attack is as insidious as Pearl Harbor was in 1941, and all of us will remember this. Now, city leaders' first response today was to try to calm any community fears of dangers here in the Salt Lake area.
Mayor Rocky Anderson and Police Chief Rick Lindsay spoke to the media just a short time ago. We had news specialist Jill Atwood there. She joins us now. Jill?
Well, Kim and Terry, obviously the pair expressed their outrage with these terrorist acts, but insisted that we as a community have to remain calm. Now, during a press conference just about an hour and a half ago, Mayor Rocky Anderson reiterated that the city of Salt Lake had received no threats and that we have no reason to believe that we are in any danger, as news specialist Stacy Butler was telling us. All public schools, public and state buildings, federal buildings are all open, but there is an obvious heightened sense of security there again, but there has not been a problem.
we started ratcheting up our response. Not that we had any information that there was going to be some event that was going to occur or any intelligence in that area, only that we knew that the size of this event, there is always a heightened anticipation on the part of the public, and we wanted to very quickly put at ease the community by putting extra police in the field, extra fire units available.
And Mayor Rocky Anderson had said just before that once again we need to remain calm and not start laying blame on certain ethnic groups, certainly restrain from any retaliation on local groups. He says let's come together and respond with love and compassion. Once again, police have what they call maximum deployment in place. Terry and Kim?
All right, Jill Atwood, thank you very much.
Of course, many people are wondering what today's terrorism attack, how it will affect the Olympics here in next February. Salt Lake Olympic Committee President Mitt Romney is in Washington, D.C. today for the national torch-bearing announcement. He also gave his condolences. He said, "We, like the rest of the nation, are appalled by the enormous travesty that has occurred today. Our prayers and sympathy are with the victims, their families, and the rescue workers. Out of respect for the loss of life that has been suffered, an emotional impact felt by our staff, SLOC has released its workers to be with their loved ones." No further comment at this time. So Mitt Romney did have no comment on how this would affect the Olympics. However, the announcement on the torch relay that was to be announced in Washington and New York and Utah tomorrow has now been postponed.
Today's devastating tragedy has certainly affected the sports world. Major League Baseball has postponed today's entire schedule. Commissioner Bud Selig says games are postponed in the interest of security and also out of a deep sense of mourning. No decision has been made concerning tomorrow's games, but the NFL is considering postponing this weekend's games, and the 2 U.S. Women's Cup soccer games scheduled for tonight in Columbus, Ohio are postponed as well as Major League Soccer's 4 games for tomorrow. And the PGA Tour has also canceled all tournaments.
Now, you also heard John Hollenhorst mention this a few moments ago. Word has it that a group of Salt Lake City firefighters are on alert now to go to New York City to help in the rescue effort. They're packing up as we speak. In the meantime, the National Guard planes out at the airport, on the east side of the airport, are fueling up. They're getting ready to carry the rescue crews wherever they do need to go. And we understand a team of firefighters consists of 63 men here. So we hope to have more information for you on this situation coming up this evening on Eyewitness News at 5 o'clock.
Well, undoubtedly, many of you in our audience today have somebody in the New York City area that you might be worried about. That's certainly the case with our staff members. The American Red Cross is busy helping, of course, in this emergency, and the American Red Cross needs your help, too.
Well, news specialist Shelley Osterloh has been looking into this angle of the story and joins us now with more. We'll give Shelley a moment here to put on her microphone, and then you can fill us in. Shelley.
Right.
Hectic day.
It has been hectic. You know, the Red Cross, of course, has set up emergency shelters near the World Trade Center and is helping victims. The Red Cross is also helping people across the country locate family members. Communication in and out of New York is difficult. Phone lines are jammed and needed for emergency workers. If you have a family member that you're worried about, you can call the American Red Cross Greater Salt Lake Area Chapter. The number is on the screen. It's 801-323-7000. And they have a number of volunteers taking calls. They are busy. You may have to be patient, but here's how you can help out and make it more efficient. Have the individual's address, work, and home phone numbers, and they'll check on that person for you. Now, here's how you can help others out. The American Red Cross is badly in need of blood donations. The following sites will be accepting blood donations. In Salt Lake, it's at 616 South, 900 East until 7 tonight, and beginning again tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. There are also blood donation centers in Ogden at this address on Country Hills Drive from 10 a.m. to 6 each day this week. In Orem at 384 East, 13th South, also from 10 to 6. And in St. George at 358 West St. George Boulevard tomorrow from 1 to 6. Now, this kind of catastrophic disaster will also stretch Red Cross resources. The emergency organization is also in need of financial donations. The Red Cross is teamed with Deseret Industries to accept donations of things like clothing and other items to aid victims. If you'd like more information, you can go to the American Red Cross website. We will have a link from our KSL.com website.
All right, very helpful.